Hello everybody. So it's been a couple of weeks now since Amber Heard put in her appeal, or her appeals brief, and I just wanted to do a bit of an analysis of what's going on with it. So first of all, let's look at the Media Watch. How many newspapers have reported on it and what have they said? What's their angle? Well, so far I've found two that are Googleable. Now there may well be more than two, but they just haven't got enough presence to be visible on Google. So if you type in Amber Heard appeal, two come up. So one of them is the New York Times, pretty major newspaper, and the other one is The Nation, which I've never heard of. Now I was expecting to see Huffington Post with something, and the Rolling Stones, since those two have been her biggest supporters the whole way through. Nothing. I would have thought that they would have something. Because the thing is, and I'll just explain this to people who aren't aware, when there are legal issues, what any newspaper, any magazine, any media outlet will do is they will have their angle, and this is whatever their beliefs are, whether it's their personal beliefs of the journalist or more likely the magazine or newspaper's beliefs and ideologies, and they will support a version of the truth that matches with that, at least with the court case. So they won't even follow ones that don't interest them as far as their beliefs are concerned. If they do follow one, they'll report only on the bits of the trial that match their beliefs. And if their candidate loses, they'll say how unfair it was. If their candidate wins, they'll say justice was served. And that is just how they do things. So we saw, before the US version of the trial began, about 80% of news outlets were supporting Amber Heard. Now this reduced to about 50% by the end of the trial, because some newspaper outlets, some medias, weren't interested but became interested when Johnny Depp started winning. And these ones came on board later on. So in other words, they probably weren't interested in the trial, except for they thought, oh, a man could actually win in this kind of case, which men do not win. This is not the kind of case that men win. So a number of the people that jumped on board later on were people that were doing so because they were shocked that Johnny Depp was actually going to win, or a chance of winning. Even getting close to a win was remarkable, and he actually won, of course. So, but she still had her support. Even by the end of the trial, 50% of media outlets around about were supporting her. That included Huffington Post and Rolling Stones magazines. Those two were two of her biggest supporters. Of course, there were others. Now, I have not, maybe they have released a newspaper outlet report or a magazine report. I suppose it's Huffington Post a magazine, maybe it's a magazine, and I haven't seen it. Maybe it'll come out in a couple of weeks, who knows. So far, at least, I have not been able to find ones by them about her appeal. The only two are those two that I mentioned before. So I think it was New York Times and The Nation. Now, New York Times and The Nation essentially both said pretty similar things. They said Amber Heard appealed. They put a link to the appeal, which was the same link that I believe Laura B got forward. And Laura B seems to me to be a Johnny Depp fan. She's met him. She's certainly not a lawyer. And she found that link, or she sourced it somehow. I believe she probably paid for it. And all these people are using it. Now, how nice of her to supply that, I'll just say. Anyway, so they got that link to Laura B. They don't say that it was sourced by a Johnny Depp fan. They just say, this is the link. And then they do not talk about the case. So neither of them talk about the case in any detail. They just talk about how women's rights, Amber Heard good person, Johnny Depp bad person, and don't really mention anything about her arguments in the appeal. So neither of them do. So neither of them mentioned it. Isn't that interesting? So there's 16 arguments essentially. That the New York Times mentioned one of them a little bit, but that's it. They mentioned the bit about how they had a case, an op-ed, which didn't even mention his name. Whoa. How shocking. How the heck could she be sued when it didn't even mention his name? Now, by my count, there were 13 Googleable articles about Johnny Depp's appeal, which was not covered very well. Compared to the actual trial and different parts of the trial, this was not covered very well, only 13. But all 13 were able to talk about the actual argument that he had. All 13. So all 13 said, oh yeah, this is the argument, blah, 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 blah. They weren't all on Johnny Depp's side. There were a couple that were on Amber Heard's side. By the way, the only two that talked about Amber Heard's one were on Amber Heard's side. Good on them. But the people that talked about Johnny Depp's one were going over the legal arguments. They're going, okay, this is the legal argument. Do we think he'll win? Do we think he'll lose? And they had different opinions. I think it was 9 in favour of him and 4 against. But then if we add the 2 that are in favour of Amber Heard's appeal, it's 9-6. It's fairly close enough to 50-50. So we're still getting, it's not like people have looked at the appeal and gone, oh, Amber Heard can't win. Not at all. That's not how this works. It wouldn't matter how bad her appeal was, these newspapers and magazines and media outlets would still support it. That's not the reason they're not reporting on it. So what's the reason? So my suspicion is it's because it's too complicated. Because I looked through it, I could follow the assignments of error, but when it looked to the appeal, I was like, what? What? What are you going on about it? It's not really clearly presented. It's really confusing argument. I don't care that bits of it are false. You expect to have things in there that are dishonest, or at least, you know, I mean, lawyers aren't allowed to lie, but they can present things from a certain point of view. But it's just too hard to follow. I couldn't make heads or tails of half of it. And I followed a bunch of different lawyers, proper lawyers who report on different things on YouTube, and they couldn't follow it. And I mean, the quickest one was an hour and a half. An hour and a half it took to read it, and they struggled to follow the whole thing. I mean, a couple of them were like 3 and 4 hours, 4.5 hours, and still couldn't make sense of it. Trying their best. These are people that are professionals, they know what they're doing, and they just couldn't. They're going, well, I think this means this, but I'm not sure. Now, that's not to say this is going to confuse judges. It's not. When they get to the stage of being judges, they're more experienced than lawyers. So judges, for people not aware, they start off as lawyers, move through the ranks. If they get enough support, consider being really good lawyers, they might be nominated for judge. Only a tiny fraction of lawyers ever become judges. And of course, once they become judges, they can go to become more senior. Court of Appeal judges are pretty high-level judges. So they're the best of the best, and they would have been the best of the best lawyers. They might not necessarily been winning all the cases, but they're the most highly respected, highly knowledgeable lawyers, and they become the most highly respected and highly knowledgeable judges. So they would know how to read this. And guess what they're going to do? Are they going to be swayed by this? Well, I've followed a lot of cases that had really complicated appeals, and I'd think, oh, this will completely confuse the lawyers, completely confuse the judges. And I've had judges go through and had hundreds of pages worth of appeals documents and come back 2 days later and said, no, dropped. And why do they do that? Simple reason is because they know that every time any lawyer does anything, there is an angle. And they will be able to see not just the arguments, but the angle of the arguments. Yes, that doesn't make sense of the arguments, that's true. But the angle of the arguments in this case is not to win the appeal. It's because, well, she's aiming to delay everything for as long as possible. That's one side of things. And by doing this, she's hoping to confuse the judges and then have them scratch their heads and make a longer appeals process, so that she can have her head held high and say, well, I would be winning on appeal, we'll just wait for the appeal a bit longer. Second angle, this is not written for the judges. This is written for the newspapers, for the magazines, for the media outlets, for the women's groups, so that they can say, well, the justice system is completely unfair, look at how much evidence she had. And that's what they're going to do. And what are the Court of Appeals judges going to do? They're going to say, no, you're just trying to manipulate us, get stuffed. They're not allowed to throw it out because of Virginian law as to how it works, so they'll look at it, give it the bare minimum amount of interest, and then finish with it. Now, of course, they're not going to completely dismiss it because they have that counter claim, well, the Johnny Depp's appeal, which they're going to listen to. And, you know, they can combine the two, and guess what the combining of the two means? It means that Amber Heard said, all right, I'll give you the 3 options. You can either throw out my verdict and make me win, you can throw out my verdict and issue a retrial, or you can can at least reduce the amount of money. And then go, okay, that reducing the amount of money aligns with Johnny Depp's. He wants to reduce the amount of money too, so let's do that. And they're going to say, okay, well, what did the jury actually say? They said 15 million. Well, because of Virginian law, we only gave him 10.3 million. Let's make that 15 million. We'll move that 5 million over to the other side. 15 million is not excessive at all. They'll give 15 million. And then they'll say, all right, well, Amber Heard is saying that the counterclaim shouldn't have worked with the claim. We agree with that, therefore we're going to dismiss the counterclaim. So she's going to get, instead of 10.3 offset by 2 million, becoming 8.3, she's going to become 15. And that's going to be the verdict. And that is a really simple verdict for the judges to make, if they look at the combined appeals compared to each other. It's really easy to make that. Now, and I can't guarantee that they definitely will do that, but I suspect that they will. Anyway, that's it from me. Bye bye now.